Over the last couple of months, I've made a lot of different videos talking about cars that you should buy for Turo. I've made videos talking about the used cars you should buy, the new cars you should buy. I've talked about the cars I'm buying. I have simply covered it all. But the one topic that I haven't talked about a lot are the cars that you should avoid buying. In fact, I haven't made a video on that subject since June or July of 2021. And believe it or not, my opinion on this topic has changed quite a lot over the last 6 to 8 months. So that's exactly what I want to talk about in this video. In this video, I want to break down the different cars that I personally think that you should avoid listing on Turo for one reason or another. So I'm going to be breaking down which cars should be avoided, why they should be avoided, and also some of the alternatives that you should look into as well. So let's get started. Now, keep in mind, this list isn't in any real specific order, and number one on this list is one that I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for because it's definitely a controversial pick to be on a list like this, and that is a Tesla. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Teslas. I think that from a consumer standpoint, Teslas are extremely, extremely cool. In fact, I at one point in time really wanted a Tesla Model S. I even test drove one at my local Tesla dealership, and I fell in love with the car, but I ultimately didn't end up buying it. When it comes to Tesla on Turo and why I think this car should be avoided, it simply comes down to oversaturation. Turo as a whole is becoming a bit oversaturated. There are a lot of markets all around the country that are simply having too many hosts and not enough renters. And the problem is that I would argue that more than any other car, Teslas are also oversaturated. There are simply a ton of Teslas available to rent on Turo. I challenge you to look at Turo in any major city and you will find no less than 6 to 12 Teslas available at any given time. There are simply so many of them, and in my opinion, I think there are too many. I think at one point in time, people were renting Teslas like crazy because they had a novelty factor to them, because people wanted to try them before they bought them, because they were really the only cool electric car available. But other manufacturers are catching up, and I think that the novelty of Tesla is wearing off a bit. Because of the novelty factor wearing off, paired with the fact that they are simply oversaturated as it is, I would simply avoid this car altogether, at least for the purpose of renting it out on Turo. If you want to get a Tesla because you want one and you want to rent it on Turo to kind of offset some of the payments, I think that that's a different story. But if you're wanting it specifically for Turo, I personally would look for another electric car. I think going for something like a Mach-E, the Ford F-150 Lightning, or any of these other new electric cars out there could be really good options instead of a Tesla. Number 2 on this list is a Volkswagen Jetta. Now, if you look up online about a Volkswagen Jetta, you'll probably see a lot of really glowing reviews about this car. I feel like in general, a Jetta is a pretty beloved car amongst Jetta owners. But in my experience and in the experience of HP, my fiance and business partner, this is simply a car that should be avoided on Turo. And there are a few reasons why. Number 1 is HP actually used to be a service advisor at an Audi dealership. So because of that, he really had a behind the scenes look at the different maintenance that goes into cars like Audis. And Volkswagens are basically Audis without the Audi badge, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it means that you kind of have an increased quality for the type of car that a Jetta is, but it's a bad thing because you have the maintenance costs that come along with an Audi without actually owning an Audi, which in my opinion is definitely a negative, not a positive. Additionally is the ROI for this car. Jettas are fairly expensive. For a used one, you can pay anywhere between $20,000 to $30,000, and in my opinion, the ROI that you get on that car just simply isn't it. You can rent these cars for between $50 to $60 per day. At least that's what I was seeing whenever I was doing research for this video. And I just think that paying $30,000 for a car that you can only rent for $50 to $60 per day, it simply isn't worth it. And there are a lot of cars out there that have a much higher ROI that I think would be a better investment. The next one on this list is a Chevy Bolt. And though this car is one that was at one point in time voted as the best car by Car and Driver magazine, it actually has a surprisingly bad depreciation rate. Now, it's not that bad if you're somebody who's just keeping this car for personal use and you don't ever plan to sell it, but it is something that is very bad if you're somebody that is wanting to buy this car for Turo, get a ton of use out of it, and then sell it for a profit. In my opinion, I think with the Chevy Bolt, doing that just simply isn't possible. Not only the less than stellar depreciation, this car also has some really major electrical and battery and charging issues. In fact, there are a lot of different charging stations throughout the United States, specifically parking garage charging stations, that don't allow for you to charge a Chevy Bolt at that location because the battery has a notorious reputation of catching on fire. Now, whenever I look at the Chevy Bolt and the value that it provides to a guest, it doesn't really provide anything inherently unique, nothing that you can't get from about a dozen other makes and models out there. Because of that, risking getting a car that has battery issues, recall issues, electrical issues, it simply isn't worth it. And if I was looking for a car that was similar but better than the Bolt, I would personally look at a Toyota Prius, a used one more specifically. Yes, they can be a bit expensive, but a Prius has the reliability of a Toyota, it has excellent depreciation, and it doesn't catch on fire. Next on the list is a Range Rover Evoque. Now, the high-end luxury aspect of this car may have you tempted to buy it for the purpose of renting it out on Turo because of the high price tag that you can get on a daily trip price. But don't be fooled by the luxury aspect of a Range Rover. This is a car that simply should be avoided at all costs. In fact, I would argue that any type of Range Rover should absolutely be avoided. Now, I'm sure having this car on this list probably doesn't surprise anybody because Range Rovers have a notorious reputation for their horrible reliability. And horrible reliability paired with expensive parts, it is a recipe that is worse than anything else you could imagine with the Turo fleet. Whenever you build out a fleet for Turo, you want to find reliability and you want to find cars that are easy to fix, and the Range Rover is neither of these. If you're looking for a luxury SUV that could potentially go after those renters looking for something a little bit nicer, but you want something with a little bit more reliability, then I would encourage you to look at a Lexus. Lexuses have a wide variety of SUVs and crossover vehicles available to you, and these are ones that are not only really nice cars to drive, but they have insane reliability and great depreciation. Last but certainly not least is the Chrysler Pacifica. Now, don't get me wrong, I really like the idea of getting a minivan for the purpose of renting it out on Turo. I see a ton of value in having a 3-row seated vehicle that you can rent out. The reason is because I think that rental car companies don't really target families. They don't go after those larger families that are traveling in large groups. They go after those maybe smaller families that need 2 rows, maybe 3 rows max, but very rarely 4 rows. Because of that, a van, I think, targets a really niche group of people that really need a car at an affordable rate. So I love the idea of renting a van. I just don't like the idea of renting a Chrysler Pacifica specifically. But with the Chrysler Pacifica, it does have some reliability issues, specifically with electrical components, which in my opinion is something that you simply shouldn't mess with. Electrical problems can be something very minor, but they can also be something extremely major and extremely costly, and that is simply a risk that isn't worth it. A really great alternative to this car could be a Toyota Sienna. They are a little bit more expensive, but again, similar to the Toyota Prius, they offer really great depreciation and even better reliability, and that is exactly what you want out of a Turo car. Now again, these are the cars that I personally think should be avoided for the purpose of Turo, but if you're somebody that has one of these cars that I listed in this list, I don't necessarily think that you need to go out and sell it, or you need to get rid of it, or you need to go buy another car ASAP. But what I do think is that you should be aware of some of the issues that could happen with these cars. That way you take this into account whenever you're pricing your vehicles, and that you're not caught off guard by any surprise bills. Now, whenever it comes to what we look for in cars and how we ultimately determine whether a car is worth buying or not, there are a few tips that I have for you. Number one is make sure to do your research on a vehicle that you're not necessarily familiar with. This is super important because you will be able to find a lot of information not only about the vehicle itself, but also about the reliability track record. For example, if HP and I are going to buy a car that we may not be that familiar with, we'll do a bunch of research, we'll read forums, Facebook groups, and see what the overall consensus is with owners that currently own that car. While we're doing this research, we'll also try to see what problems does this car have and how do we remedy these problems. If these problems that cars have are relatively easy to fix, then it's not necessarily off-putting to buy the car. But alternatively, if there's an issue that a bunch of different owners are reporting and there's no real fix to go about solving that problem, this is a really big red flag that we should simply avoid that car altogether, because if a lot of people are having one single problem and if there's no fix for it, there's a good chance that you'll have that problem too, and once you do, you'll simply be screwed. Another really good thing to always do is to check the recall information for the specific car and also look at the recall history. If there's a specific make or model that's constantly having recalls, in my opinion, I think that that's a good sign to simply avoid that car altogether, because you cannot have a car actively listed on Turo with an open recall. Recalls are really tough because they're something that's basically completely out of your control. And if it's an easy recall, then it can be fixed in a matter of days. But if it's one phone without a resolution, then you could be sitting weeks, if not months, with a car that you can't rent out. And then really the last thing that we always look for is the accessibility of the parts. If parts are cheap and if they're easy to find, that is, in our opinion, a really good sign that a car is going to be relatively easy to fix. If you're going to have to wait weeks, if not months, for a specific part for your German car, that's going to be really hard to keep that car active on the Turo platform, and it just makes the car difficult to manage. We want accessibility, we want things to be super easy, and we want things to be streamlined, and having easy access to cheap parts is the best way to do this. If parts aren't cheap, if they're not accessible, if they're hard to find, then we typically will avoid these cars altogether, which is why we avoid things like Range Rovers, Jaguars, different cars that we've listed on this list. Now, like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any other cars that I left off of this list that you think should have been included, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.